Yo, what's going on, everyone? It's Brian here with DrinkABeerandPlayAGame, and today I am proud to bring you a review of Resident Evil Village. Now, you might be asking yourself, where's Jim and what's up with the werewolf? Unfortunately, Jim hasn't gotten the game yet, and I beat it within 2 days of getting it, so there was no way I could wait any longer because I have zero patience. As far as the werewolf, what do I need to say? The game's full of werewolves. I love werewolves. Let's just get into it. Released May 7th of this year, this has to be the quickest review I've ever turned around. Developed and published by Capcom, this game was available on Microsoft Windows, the PlayStation 4 and 5, the Xbox One, the Xbox One X and S, and for some reason, Stadia, which I didn't even realize was still around. The game takes place 3 years after the events in Resident Evil 7 as you follow Ethan and Mia Winters with their new child Rose as they try to live a normal life in Europe. I don't want to reveal anything else at this point, but be aware there will be some major spoilers throughout the review, so proceed with caution. So with that, let's get into it. The graphics. Full disclaimer, I played this game on the original Xbox One, so if you're wondering why the footage looks a little blurry, hopefully this makes a little more sense. Here's some footage from what it would look like on a modern console, but unfortunately, I don't have one of those yet. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the game. Whenever you're talking about a Resident Evil game, the most important aspects for me are the enemies and the set pieces. Right off the bat, the enemies are completely different than the other Resident Evil games. They went with a more classic monster approach, as the first enemies you encounter are these Lycans, which are basically werewolves. Then you are introduced to the 5 major bosses. We got Lady D, who is a 9-foot vampire, and some of you like to call her Dami Mommy. You got Heisenberg, which you could argue is almost like a mad scientist or Frankenstein. You have Donna Beneviento, who's a weird doll maker, almost like a ghost, mixed with a witch. You have Salvatore Moreau, who is like an unfortunate gillman slash merman. And then you have the big boss, Mother Miranda, who is the mother of crows. She is a witch. She's just creepy looking as shit. Getting back to your more common enemies, you have flying enemies. You have these zombie-like creatures, but really it turns out these are just prisoners who probably got their blood sucked by Lady D throughout the dungeon. And then once you get to Heisenberg's areas, there's a whole new level of enemies, which are called like soldats. And they're like cyborgs with like mechanical drills for arms, or in some cases they have jets. So there's a couple different variations. Every model in this game has a ton of detail into it. And there's a few different variations, even among the common style enemies. Now what's interesting is this game did get some press for potentially plagiarizing Frankenstein's army, especially when you have an enemy like this Stroom guy who has a propeller for a head. You could argue that's a coincidence, or maybe there was some inspiration. Either way, I absolutely loved all the way the models looked. Now on top of that, I mentioned set pieces. Not only do you have the village as its own main centerpiece, but you have unique areas for each of the 5 bosses. And when you're in Lady D's castle, it can be really beautiful, or if you're down in the dungeons, it's grimy, it's dirty, it's creepy. The real turning point for me is once you get to Lady Donna's house, because there's like nothing. It's a regular house, but it's so creepy because there's dolls everywhere. It feels like it's something out of Silent Hills PT. And then sure enough, you get hit with this creepy ass baby that still gives me nightmares. Heisenberg, his factory, or whatever you want to call it, is just massive. And there's just mechanical gears and things going on all over the place. And then there's Moreau's area, which is like a flooded town. That's probably my least favorite of those 4. And then Mother Miranda is once again just a return to the village, just with a little bit of a variation to it. So all the set pieces knock it out of the park for the way it looks. And in all honesty, I couldn't find many flaws. I love the new creature designs. There are some good transformations from each of the major bosses. I couldn't help but give this a 9. I probably would have given it a 10, but once again, I was playing this on Xbox One, and yes, I know it looks better in this playthrough, So maybe I should be giving it a 10, but for right now, I'll stick with my 9. When it comes to beer, I'm just going to add 1 for that creepy-ass baby. The sound. Resident Evil, as a series, is not known for having an amazing soundtrack, with tracks that last in your memory long after you're done playing the game. Most of the songs provided usually are just good set pieces to go along with the action. This game is no different, although there are songs during some key sequences that really amplify the terror. Like in Lady Benvenuto's house, this song just creeped me the hell out. But what really steals the show is the sound design. As you move through the village and you're checking out all these little houses and there's anywhere with woods, there always has ambient noise that makes you think something's right behind you. You hear twigs breaking, you hear trees being ruffled, you just hear what sounds like footprints. And it gets really worse when you're in the dungeon or in the castle and there's a big echo of just something moving. You're always on your toes because of the sound in this game, and whether something is there or not, it can really throw you off. So this is a game I highly suggest. Wear headphones because there's so much being put in there. And of course, let's talk about the voice acting. Every major character in this game is really, really well done. I usually get very annoyed with the main protagonist as their voices are kind of meh, overacted, underacted. The actor who did Ethan portrayed him very sympathetically. You feel for him. You feel his pain when he's delivering his lines. And all the enemies are so unique to one another that, man, they really just pulled out all the stops. I usually don't give games very high points unless you have an amazing soundtrack. But this one, I gave an 8.5. And the reason for that little 0.5 burst is, as I mentioned, there were some songs that really did stick with me, more so than any of the previous Resident Evil games. So when it comes to beer, once again, not going to add any. This game is just, it's awesome. The control I can keep fairly short because it replicates everything from Resident Evil 7. You have your main attack, you have a guard button, you push in the stick to run, even though sometimes I had a little bit of an issue with that. And you can have some quick access to specific items when you use your D-pad. That's my one little knock here is I kind of wish they either had a item wheel or just more options than 4. I know that adds to some of the strategy, but when you're able to just pause the game by going to your menu anyway and selecting items as you need, then it's not like only limiting you to 4 really increases the pressure. It's just more of an annoyance to go back into the menu. Now, one issue I had right off the bat was, for some reason, my block was not working at all. Then I discovered it was actually my controller because my LB button was either worn down, just non-responsive, so I had to end up getting myself a new controller. With new controller in hand, the blocking worked fine, the shooting worked fine, the quick turnaround, there really is no complaint. Everything is pretty sharp, especially for a game where you're fighting enemies who can be so fast like these Lycans. So, yeah, I don't have many complaints. It may not be completely perfect, but I gave it an 8. I think this is about as good of a control as you would expect for a first-person horror game in this day and age. When it comes to beer, I'm going to add 1 for these damn controllers not lasting as long as I think they should. The gameplay. At its core, every Resident Evil game can be summed up by you have overwhelming odds against you in the form of monsters, so you need to do a real good job with item management. You need to solve some puzzles, defeat a bunch of common enemies until you get to a boss, clear an area, find the key item, move on to the next area until you get to the big bad boss. That's the simplest way I can sum up any game, and this is no different. But what really makes this game, and I know Jim hates these things, but the story.
But I'm not.
As I mentioned at the beginning of this review, this game takes place 3 years after the events of Resident Evil 7, as Ethan and Mia and their new daughter Rose are trying to start a new life under the protection of Chris Redfield. Well, flash forward a few minutes into the game and Chris is shooting up Mia. He steals Rose and you have no idea why. After a quick car wreck, you soon discover this village, and as you investigate between all the monsters and everything else, you soon discover that the entire village is under the control of Mother Miranda, who was using this thing called a megamycete and these kaijus, which are organisms which allow her to infect individuals, most of them becoming lichens, a few of the others become the more powerful creatures. You also discover that Mother Miranda's been around so long, she was actually the teacher of Oswald Spencer, who essentially started the Umbrella Corporation and helped teach him about how to inject people with things. So he created the T-Virus, so she's that crucial to the lore of Resident Evil. Even more disturbing, after you defeat Lady D, you find this container that you don't know what's inside of it, but soon it gets revealed to you it's one of the dismembered body parts of your daughter. That was a complete mindfuck for me. I just could not believe what it was saying, and you soon discover you have to find 4 of these containers, put them together, and you'll be able to bring your daughter back because she has some special abilities. So right there, that's heart-wrenching as hell. You're looking for your daughter, and she's in a bunch of different containers. Add on top of that, you keep running into Chris, who ends up explaining Mia was not really Mia, but it was Mother Miranda. So he's been trying to protect Ethan and Rose and try and defeat Mother Miranda. So you have this weird back and forth of both of them now working towards a common goal of bringing down Mother Miranda. But along the way, after Mother Miranda, what you think kills you, you discover Ethan's actually been dead since Resident Evil 7. And his first encounter with Jack, he's murdered. And then the mold infects him, and his body now is 100% mold. I know it sounds goofy, but then it makes a lot of things make sense. Like throughout the game, your hands are just getting completely jacked up. You get your hand chopped off at one point, and all he does is put it together and throw some medicine on it, and it works fine. This is completely ridiculous. But either way, at the end, Ethan is able to defeat Mother Miranda with the help of Chris. And unfortunately, he doesn't make it. Flash forward many years later, Rose apparently is very special powered. She's like the 3rd iteration of the Evelyn from Resident Evil 7. So she's super powerful, almost think like Alice from the Resident Evil movies. I don't know if that's where they're going to take it, but I'll tell you what, I love where this story went, and I love just this little 1-2 punch of the Ethan timeline. He's a faceless character that we never actually get to see. And I completely feel for the guy. He did everything for his family. So I definitely love what this story did. And on top of all that, the game just has amazing horror settings. Like I said during the graphics, that House Benevenito, the castle, the factory, they all play so different, and I just loved every bit of it. The puzzles, none of them were that difficult to figure out, and you have a wide variety of weapons that you can use to take out these enemies. Excellent. The nice part is, once you beat the game, you'll be able to unlock more weapons, and it just gives you a ton of replayability, which we'll hit up a little bit later. Once you beat the game, you do have the option to go back and play the Mercenaries mode, which is simply just go through an area, defeat as many enemies as you can, earn the highest points available. I know there's going to be the release of the Reverse mode this summer. It was supposed to come with this game, but that'll be another interesting 6-player multiplayer option that just keeps adding to how much you can do in this game. While nothing is truly revolutionary in the gameplay, it is just so well done. And being a Resident Evil nerd, I ate everything up. So when it comes to score, I gave the gameplay a 10. I loved it. I'm almost through my 2nd playthrough, and I know I'm going to be coming back again and again to try every difficulty because I just love what they did with this game. When it comes to beer, I'm not even going to add any. The Originality. Unfortunately, like most games that are the 8th in any main series, there's not going to be a ton here. What this game does, though, like a lot of clever games or movies, is that it borrows heavily from previous titles. So right off the bat, let's just get this out here. There are so many things that remind you of Resident Evil 4, from the beginning, entering a village, being attacked by a huge horde of things before it eventually goes away, to the fact that you have the Duke, who even makes a reference to the original merchant from Resident Evil 4. There's just things that feel so close to that game. It's as if they mixed the Resident Evil 7 engine with Resident Evil 4, coded it in classic monster lore, and here you go. Now, you would think with that I would say this doesn't feel original, but somehow it still manages to make me feel like I'm experiencing things new. Because I'm dealing with an enemy I haven't played before, every area where you're about to fight a new boss gave you a completely different feeling. Throw in there a story that, as I said, it threw me for a loop, and I was pleasantly surprised. Everything did feel new, even though it was all familiar. So, unfortunately, I could only give this game a 4. Everything else we've already seen with the huge amount of unlockables, the Mercenaries mode, still, at its core, there's nothing that major here. So when it comes to beer, I'm only going to add 1. I think some people may have been disappointed with not as much new introduced. Me, I'm fine with it. The replayability. Holy hell. This game offers you every reason to come back and play again and again. No, the story does not ever change, and none of that changes, but what is available are a ton of unlockables, which you get by earning points, by completing challenges, and just playing through the game. So after your first playthrough, you'll unlock the ability to play hardcore mode or Village of Shadows difficulty. And when you reload your final save, you're playing a new game plus. So you do have the option to bring all of your modified weapons as well as all of your perks, which are basically gained by hunting animals throughout, and they're like permanent buffs for your character. Now, these things won't guarantee success in your next playthrough, so you're just going to have to keep unlocking more and more, and I would strongly advise make sure you get the infinite ammo available under the bonus content. I already mentioned the Mercenaries mode, and when Reverse comes out, there's just so many reasons to play. But if you took out all those additional modes, I would still say, if you're a completionist like me, you have at least 5 playthroughs to unlock every challenge in this game. And for me, it's well worth it because it's really fun. So when it comes to replayability, I'm going to give it a 10. When it comes to beer, I'm only going to add 1 because I'm going to be pretty damn thirsty for all my playthroughs. Woo! This game infected me with how much I love it. From the characters, the settings, the new monsters, and of course, it's a Resident Evil game with werewolves. How could I not love the shit out of it? I had to give this game a 10. To me, it's everything I want out of a first-person horror game, and I know many of you out there may not love it as much as I do. That's okay. It is a perfect game for me, but it's not going to be for everyone else. When I combined all my scores together, it rounds out to a 9. It's one of the highest scores I've ever given it, and I'm sure if Jim did his part of the review, the score would drop a lot because he hates story. Still, I don't think you can go wrong. If you're looking for a modern horror game or a nice twist on Resident Evil, this is the one for you. When it comes to beer pairing, I decided to go with the Elysian Brewing Company's Dark of the Moon, which is a pumpkin beer that comes in at 7.6%. You're going to need that much alcohol to deal with the fact that you're putting together parts of your daughter's body to bring her back. But I've also had this, it's delicious, and look at that label. Does this not scream Resident Evil Village? Grab a couple bottles, enjoy yourself, but remember to drink your beers and play your games responsibly.